parties emerge. So we already have been seeing that how during Washington's first term, there were members of Congress and especially higher ups that are dividing into, supporters of Hamilton's program, who are going to then make up the Federalist Party, versus the Republican Party or the Jeffersonian Republicans that are going to be under Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, who identify more with like individual liberties, heritage of the Revolution, and eventually we're going to see more like states' rights over a federal authority and everything. So the thing is, in like 1792, these two parties are basically in the formative stage. Divisions are really within Congress, not the broader electorate. However, this is all going to start broadening by 1796. And a lot of this is going to come from the French Revolution. The thing is, the French Revolution began in 1789. Now, early on, Americans are going to really applaud it because it's really exciting to see an ally of America, really their first big ally, now seems to be following in their example, overthrowing the monarchy on some level and having a more democratic regime. But the French Revolution is actually a lot more complicated than that. It ends up turning a lot more radical and a lot more violent. In 1792, they execute their king and they basically slaughter any suspected enemies. There's a lot of people caught up in it. A lot of the people who first started the French Revolution end up being the ones beheaded by the end of it, ironically. So there's a whole lot of issues with that alone. And then on top of that, in 1793, France goes to war with Britain as well as other European powers, partly because other countries don't really want you to overthrow a monarchy, because then what if their civilians follow suit? So this is really going to begin this bitter debate in America of which side are you on in the French Revolution. Now, Federalists generally draw back kind of in horror from France's new regime, whereas the Republicans are really going to see like the French as the standard bearers of the cause of liberty for, like common people everywhere. So generally speaking, keeping in mind all the other things about like the Federalist Party versus the Jeffersonian Republicans, the Federalist Party tends to be more pro-British, whereas the Jeffersonian Republicans tend to be more pro-French. The thing is, you also have to keep in mind the Franco-American relationship at this time, because America is still bound to France by the Franco-American Alliance of 1778. And in fact, this alliance, which they had helped us out during the whole Revolutionary War, is going to require the United States to assist France in the defense of, firstly, its West Indian colonies, but also to open up American ports to French privateers if the French were being attacked. This is technically making the United States be put in a position that is going to more openly go against the British. And Washington is really fearful that America might be pulled into this European war, and that really he felt like it was none of our business. And on top of that, it could have disastrous results for the nation's finances. And so Washington actually calls on a special cabinet meeting to discuss this issue. Now, Alexander Hamilton, one of the big leaders of the Federalist Party, is going to want Washington to declare neutrality. However, Thomas Jefferson, one of the big leaders of the Jeffersonian Republicans, is going to oppose Hamilton and point out technically Congress is the only one that has the power to declare neutrality. Washington, in the end, is going to steer this kind of middle course. He's not going to take any action against the French or to like suspend the Franco-American Treaty, but he is going to accept Hamilton's argument and basically declares neutrality, and in fact issues a proclamation in 1793 saying that the United States would be, and I quote, friendly and impartial towards the belligerent powers. So we're really trying to stay neutral here, thinking about the finances and the issues that could come out of this. Plus, there is this question of, yes, we signed this accord with the French government, but with the French Revolution, is this the same French government that America signed this accord with? So it's really complicated. We're also seeing other things cause the emergence of parties. So, or actually, I should say, really more so during this time period, we're seeing Washington try to overcome some of those issues that he was presented with. And so it's things like securing the frontier. Remember, the control of the West is an issue. In 1793, a lot of Americans who had moved west felt like they were abandoned by the national government. They felt like the government had promised to protect them against like Indians and foreigners and had basically broken that promise. So in the summer of 1794, we're going to see Washington's administration sends to the Ohio Valley region a force that was built around veterans. And basically they're going to have victory against the Native Americans in August of 1794 in the Battle of Fallen Timbers. This is actually near present-day Toledo. This really broke the back of Indian resistance in the Ohio region, and it's actually going to result in the Treaty of Greenville, made in August of 1795. Basically, in the Treaty of Greenville, 12 tribes are going to cede most of the present-day state of Ohio to the United States government in return for annual payments as well, and this basically means that Ohio is now open for white settlement. We also see some issues, though, arise from some things that have been put into place under Washington, such as we get the Whiskey Rebellion. So the thing is, there were a lot of whiskey rebels of this time period who were basically openly resisting Hamilton's excise tax on whiskey. And one region that there was a lot of these whiskey rebels was in western Pennsylvania. Now, Hamilton was really determined to enforce this tax and assert the supremacy of the national laws, of the national government. Like I said before, resistance is pretty widespread throughout all of the American states, but they're going to really single out these Pennsylvania rebels, partly because Washington was really concerned that these groups in western Pennsylvania might identify too closely with what he saw as some of the dangerous doctrines of the French Revolution. So he's actually going to call on the governors from these mid-Atlantic states to supply militia forces to crush the Whiskey Rebellion. In fact, you get a 13,000-man army made, which is actually larger than any army Washington led during the American Revolution. And they march on western Pennsylvania, but the whole Whiskey Rebellion could never be found. The army met no resistance. They expended considerable effort just rounding up 20 prisoners. But it makes their point that the federal government, when their authority was openly challenged, the government could use and would use military force to compel obedience. So you're seeing already some of these now splintering to the electorate with the idea of that maybe people who are against Hamilton's excise tax might be joining the Jeffersonian Republicans, and so we're seeing the emergence of parties a little bit more here as well. And then we get some treaties that are going to further cause this emergence of parties. So the thing is, the French were still at war, but then they're going to open their colonial trade to neutral shippers, and American merchants jump on this chance because this means that American merchants could trade with both like Great Britain and France. So it's a great way to make a lot of money by being a neutral during these kinds of conflicts. However, the British are going to retaliate by seizing American ships that were involved in French trade, and then the British claimed the right to search American ships, which that's more along the lines of what's normal, but also to impress or forcibly remove sailors that they suspected as having deserted from the British Navy. The impressment of sailors is really complicated at this time because the thing is, you have to keep in mind, America is a really, really new country, and there were people that had been of British descent making up most of the American citizens. And so let's say if you were a British civilian who had moved to America right before the American Revolution, are you really British or are you American? Where does your loyalty lie? Did you move to America just to avoid having to ever be, going to war in Great Britain's conflicts and things like that? And so it gets really, really complicated because America is such a new country. And this is going to be an issue that comes up later again. So anyway, all of this is going to end up with Jay's Treaty. This is going to be a treaty between America and Great Britain that is negotiated in 1794. Basically, the United States makes major concessions in this treaty to avert war with the British over their seizure of American ships. Basically, America abandons their right as a neutral country to ship goods to nations at war, so giving up that right to ship to both sides without interference. And then on top of that, they're going to name in this treaty Britain the most favored nation, which basically gave up the American right to discriminate against British shipping and merchandise. They're also going to reiterate that, yes, American civilians need to repay their pre-revolutionary debts. And in return, Britain basically pledges to compensate American merchants for ships that they had seized. This causes a lot of uproar because it had basically stripped America of their chief economic weapon of retaliation against the British. The only reason Jay's treaty passes in Congress is because Washington backs it, really. However, even if you're going, oh man, that seems unfair or anything, or you're having issues with this, the thing is, one thing that you can say, no matter what the good that comes out of this, besides America doesn't go to war with Great Britain, is the Treaty of San Lorenzo. The thing is, this Treaty of San Lorenzo is with Spain in 1795, and it's mostly due to Jay's treaty as well as a string of French victories during like 1795 in Europe. Basically, Spain at this point in San Lorenzo's treaty is going to accept the American position of the 31st parallel as the northern boundary of Spanish Florida. So finally we get that boundary. And they would go on to grant American farmers the right of free transit through the port of New Orleans. So I want you thinking about this right now, but I want you thinking about this throughout all of the PowerPoints that are going on during this like time period and everything. What side would you choose here? Are you more pro-British? Are you more pro-French? Think about why. You might kind of make note and go, oh, I'm more pro blah, blah, blah at this time. But in a couple of PowerPoints, you might decide that, no, actually, I've switched sides to the other side. And I want you thinking about this because this is a discussion question that we're going to be posting about. So you can kind of go back, change your mind, add to things. Where do you fall on this whole scale?